Some news on the domestic front here. Pollution from East Palestine train derailment rained down in 16 states. Study says, yes, 16, 1-6. So on February 3rd, 2023, as we know, a train carrying toxic chemicals crashed in northeastern Ohio, sending up a large black cloud over Ohio and Pennsylvania after officials decided to burn off the hazardous materials. As the chemicals lofted into the air, the pollution spread as far as 16 states, according to a new study. I didn't expect to see an impact this far out, says David Gay, lead author of the study. There's more going on here than most people would have guessed, including me. Toxic chemicals rained down from South Carolina to Wisconsin to New England following the accident, according to the new analysis in the Environmental Research Letters Journal. Overall, the pollution spread over 540,000 square miles, or 14% of the United States land area. People closer to the accident reported rashes, nausea, and headaches, but Gay said the low chemical concentrations farther away from the accident weren't toxic but are pretty unusual at a lot of places. Many of those pollutants can run off and affect marine and plant life. It's not death and destruction, it's fairly low concentrations, but they are very high relative to the normal that we typically see, some of the highest we've measured in the last 10 years, Gay said. The accident occurred around 9 p.m. on February 3rd near East Palestine, a town of almost 5,000 residents on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. The train, operated by Norfolk Southern, experienced a mechanical issue that caused more than 50 cars to derail. Some of the trains obviously were carrying hazardous materials, including a known human carcinogen called vinyl chloride. Now, here's the thing, obviously, and we know this, but just to refresh, in an emergency decision, officials authorized a, quote, my editorial there, controlled burn of the hazardous chemicals to prevent a catastrophic explosion. But as the vinyl chloride burned, it broke into separate chloride and hydrogen ions in the atmosphere that got carried by the wind to other locations. When it began to rain in various places, the pollutants were pushed from the air and deposited on the ground. The National Atmospheric Deposition Program at the University of Wisconsin at Madison collects these ground depositions weekly across 260 sites across North America. Gay, who serves as coordinator of the program, routinely analyzes the data to monitor air pollutants. If you have a lot of pollution in the atmosphere, you get a lot of wet deposition pollution at the ground. So here is a map surveying areas with abnormally high chloride concentrations the week of and week after the East Palestine train derailment are shown. Yellow circles show measurement in the 90th percentile or above compared to the last decade. East Palestine is marked with the star there in the sort of middle of that map. But as you can see, super high concentrations relative to normal. Like I said, not enough to pose a threat to humans, but enough to do atmospheric damage in terms of plant life, water life, and even a smell in the air. You could see 99 out in Wisconsin, 91 up in Maine, quite the radius, where it says 97 in the middle there, just about, I don't know, about an inch on your screen to the right. That 97, that's about where I live now. And a little bit south of there is where I lived at the time. Now, I have a horrible sense of smell. I was never able to really smell much of anything in my life. But I remember a few days after that accident, my wife said it smells like perfume outside. There's a chemical smell in the air. I did not smell it. Like I said, I have never had a good nose. But this is all looks here. There's very, very little actual functionality here. But I said that has to be chemicals being carried over from the jet stream. I mean, we're about 500 miles from that town, which compared to Earth's surface is a pretty short distance. I mean, it's a long distance in the fact that it's a long car ride, but it's actually not that long a distance in the grand scheme of things. And the fact that you have a radius where you could see the after effects of this that far out really just puts into perspective what was done to these poor people in that town. You have to ask, did they have to release those chemicals the way they did, or was that done to get the track cleared out as quickly as possible so that commerce can run as quickly as possible through there?
Yeah, my money's on B.
Yeah.
B.
Yeah.
They needed to clear it for commerce. And also this is another case, very much like Boeing, very much like the 2008 financial crash, where there was a lot of malfeasance at the executive level that led up to this crash, a lot of deception on the part of the CEO. Well, where's the criminal trial?
Yeah.
Where is the criminal trial? And this is another point that Thomas Frank often makes. For the poor, there is just brutal enforcement of any infraction of the law. Whereas if you're wealthy, it's just there's really almost no crime you can commit that they're going to send you to jail for. You're by definition too big to jail. This is supposedly, we had this whole American Revolution to get rid of aristocracy, but the logic of aristocracy is very much with us, and very much like peasants, it's rarely questioned. It's accepted that there is going to be a two-tier justice system. People might grumble when it's just too out of control, but they do kind of assume that, well, wealthy elites, of course, they're not going to get the same justice that we do. People didn't always assume that, but they've gradually been conditioned to bow their head to their betters.
Yes. And as far as this East Palestine story goes, it doesn't end there. This was a story from mid-June. Toxic garlic should have prompted EPA to warn against gardening near Ohio derailment, Watchdog says. So let's go to a little news report about toxic garlic being grown near the site.
This isn't the banned toxic garlic, right?
No, not to be confused with the banned toxic garlic.
Toxic garlic in East Palestine, Ohio. That troubling finding is prompting renewed concerns tonight about the safety of the area and risks to the residents who still call it home, more than a year after a toxic train derailment wreaked havoc on their lives. So here's what we know. Last week, the nonprofit Government Accountability Project filed a petition with the EPA calling on the agency to conduct additional soil studies near the derailment site. The petition cites independent testing that found high levels of chemicals in garlic grown in East Palestine. The EPA insisted it was safe to garden there just weeks after the derailment, based on tests conducted by state officials in multiple locations around the area. The agency has dismissed independent testing in the past, citing concerns with quality control. Now, the petition echoes demands residents have been making for months, asking federal officials to acknowledge the dangers caused by the derailment and compensate them accordingly. Scott Smith has been conducting independent...
Okay, now we're going to go to Scott Smith, who makes this point, but I just want to reiterate, in case you missed that, because she was talking kind of fast there. It wasn't Norfolk Southern that said, don't worry about it, it's safe to grow here. It was the EPA. It was the supposed watchdog agency that's supposed to be keeping a company like Norfolk Southern in compliance with environmental regulation. They're the ones that said, don't worry about it, safe to move back in, grow whatever shit you want in the ground, it's all good. That's the EPA it came from. Okay, now he's going to explain why that is.
Tests in East Palestine. He is CEO of U.S. Biosolutions and says it is his mission in life to focus on solving contamination problems. Thank you both for joining us. Scott, I want to start with you. Cancer-causing dioxins, I think is how that's said, are the biggest concern here when it comes to chemicals found in the soil. What can you tell us about them? Why are they so dangerous?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us, and this is very important for the community, Lauren. But the cancer-causing chemicals here, to put it in perspective, I've been in 60 disasters, starting with my own, and every chemical I've ever encountered is in East Palestine. This is what makes us different. The mixtures of chemicals are unprecedented. And I have a saying, you can't find what you don't look for. The EPA is being very, very clever here because they're clearly a captured agency, and they've been corrupted by the multi-billion-dollar undue influence. So, for example, in the garlic or the garden produce, we had a control sample from a resident that did not have any before the derailment, and the preliminary results we got with the few samples we took were 54,000% higher than the control.
Wow.
You can't find what you don't look for. Here's what the EPA did. They went upwind miles away. They have not done any actual tests in the garden or in the soil in what I call the hot zones in East Palestine. So in simple terms, you can't find what you don't look for.
Says it all right there.
Wow.
I mean, that is pretty fucking damning shit there. I mean,
Well,
that is just it's I would say it's unbelievable, but it's really not unbelievable. It's really part and parcel of what this fucking shithole country, as I to paraphrase what I said to the great Thomas Frank, has turned into. You wouldn't expect anything different. But it falls to this guy here who said, "Hey, why don't we test the garlic? Why don't we test the crops in the hot zone? Because you can't find what you don't look for." Right.
Well, this is where trust the science has become such a hated phrase, because it has come to represent the reality that the agencies and the authorities that are meant to be protecting us are invoking an older ethos of putting science first that they do not actually represent. They have stolen the credibility that science once had and corrupted it in order to line their own pockets, and they use invocations of its name to protect themselves from reprimand and consequences. And of course, our friend Dr. Can I say? I don't want to get us in trouble.
I don't know who you're talking about.
There's a certain doctor associated with the phrase "I am science," very, very, very much like Louis XIV.
Yeah.
I am the state.
Yeah.
That is the modern version of I am the state. I am science. So everyone knows who I'm talking about. I don't know what the rules are on YouTube these days, so I'm gonna err on the side of caution, but you know what I mean.
He's got to study up for when my baby comes. Otherwise, I'm going to come back. I'm going to have to be driving pizzas around again.
Yeah. it'll be like Kill Bill. His kids will grow up and come for revenge.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm going to give Russell a Regent style pop quiz, proctored and everything, multiple choice exam.
I'm going to be careful about the doctor who shall not be named. But this is why people have lost faith in our institutions, and they're right to. The institutions that are supposed to be protecting us, they're just revolving door agencies where these scumbags very often come out of these same companies they're supposed to be regulating. And so why do you go into government? It's a resume builder. Right. It's the same reason you go and you get a certificate that you can put on your resume, right? Oh, I did 2 years. And that also helps when you go back out to get the real job. Now you can lobby for the company because you know all the people at the agency. You worked at the agency. You know who to call. You make yourself more valuable to these corporations. Plus, you do them some favors. You get a quid pro quo when you get out. I highly recommend, I've recommended this before, on Netflix, there's a show called The Bleeding Edge that will fucking horrify you, about the medical device industry and how corrupted it is. We all talk about the pharmaceutical agencies. Nobody ever looks at the medical device agencies. They're horrible. They're horrible. Like, they approve things that are deadly, that are dangerous, that destroy people's lives, and they're all just bought off people who have worked for the same companies they're supposed to be regulating.
Well, this is a year and a half out now, and this toxic garlic story just broke. Just a week ago. That was in the AP. I think June 15th. That dated, something like that. The font is very small now, but yeah. Mid-June, over a year out. And what this guy is saying is they never tested in the hot zone. Right. They never even looked in the hot zone. They looked where they knew they would get a good result, so they could tell people, well, it's cool, right? And meanwhile, he said inside the hot zone, what was it, a 54,000% above normal increase? So yeah, that's where he says you don't know what you don't find what you don't look for, right?
As a nation, we are in our dissolute third generation of the royal family phase. Very often you see this pattern where the person who establishes the lineage is not the greatest in the lineage. It's the second one, because the second one is close enough to the warrior king who established the lineage, had that kind of vitality, close enough to that perspective, but knows the ways of court, knows the ways of governance. That, your Kubla Khans, right? That'll wind up being the great one. And then the third one is just the one that fucks it all up, the one that inherits all these benefits and advantages and just uses that name to just completely go on an epic quest of debauchery. That's where we are now. We're in the idiot third generation of an aristocracy.
Please clap.